welcome back. Where is the true location of the biblical Mount Sinai, the very place where Moses received the Ten Commandments from God as described in the book of Exodus? A fascinating new film called Patterns of Evidence, Journey to Mount Sinai Part 2 goes on the ground in the Middle East to find out. I spoke to the man behind the film, but first, here's a sneak peek, and you can find out more at patternsofevidence.com.
I'm investigative filmmaker Tim Mahoney, and my investigation continues for the true location of Mount Sinai. Follow me and Exodus Explorers on a search for more biblical evidence.
These are the 12 stones?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4.
At this place, something very important happened.
There was so much evidence. It felt like I walked into something that was 3,500 years old, undisturbed.
The characteristics of Mount Sinai described in the Bible match the characteristics of a volcano exactly.
How could Moses have ascended a mountain into an active volcanic eruption?
When Moses fled, he went to Midian. Why haven't scholars looked in Midian in Saudi Arabia?
Because they can't. That's why.
What risk would these Exodus explorers be willing to take to prove the Bible?
After 5 years, he made a desperate decision.
He made a desperate decision.
That just kind of poisoned the well for everyone else. Then they do scientific work in the area, and they put fences up and keep people away.
The true location of Mount Sinai is a topic, Tim, that has fascinated Watchmen viewers for years. We've covered this issue. Why is this film different than other takes on this issue? What sets it apart?
For 20 years, I've been at the trying to get this film and this investigation conducted. And this one, I actually decided to look at 6 different mountains. So the first film in October that came out earlier, I looked at the first 3. But each of these films are different. They're separate from each other. So you don't have to see one to appreciate the other. This one is going to be looking at mountains in Saudi Arabia, which had been the forbidden location for a long time for a lot of people, and that's why it was very difficult. And when I went to Saudi Arabia in 2002, I went there with official permission with a small group. But once I got to that mountain, things changed, and that's when we got into trouble with being there. And at the end of the trip, my footage was confiscated, and I wasn't sure where I was going to be after that.
Now, you mentioned you've been at this for 20 years when it comes to Mount Sinai. You've done previous films about the Red Sea, but when it comes to Mount Sinai, what sparked your interest in this particular hunt?
2000, 2001, 2003, 2000, in that time period, there was information coming out. People didn't know where it was coming from. And it was basically showing that there was a pattern of evidence for altars, for pillars, for potential graveyard that was matching the events of the Exodus in Saudi Arabia, but that it was forbidden. And I don't know, when things are forbidden, it feels like they're hiding something, right? And so I ended up getting to know the people, some of the players who I call Exodus explorers, and I started to find them. They started to find me, and we were doing interviews, and that was what was intriguing to me. But I also had another group of people who were very much against this idea that Mount Sinai would be in Arabia, would be in Saudi Arabia. They really favored other locations. And some of them were strong believers, and they had a faith. And so I thought, how in the world am I going to reconcile an investigation? And that's when I thought, why don't I just look at 6 of these mountains? And then, obviously, there's different ways to interpret it, but pretty much you can go through and look at these mountains and say, does it fit? Where is the location of Mount Sinai? Does it fit Midian, for example, the ancient land of Midian? Or what about the journey? It says it took a period of time, like 45 to, some people think 45 to 50 days to get there. Some of these mountains are so close to Egypt that you could get there in a short time. So that doesn't quite fit the criteria.
You've devoted so much of your life and your work to this, to bringing archaeology to life for everyone. What are your thoughts on why this is so important for Christians?
Jesus says, because you didn't, follow or believe in, Moses or follow what he was saying, how can you believe in me? And so when people dismiss Moses and the Exodus, which a lot of scholars have been doing, they don't think there's any truth to it. I interviewed 3 scholars who really didn't believe in any of this because they didn't think there was any evidence for it. And what we've always talked about is, are you looking in the right time and are you looking in the right place? But when they dismiss the events of the Old Testament, then they dismiss Jesus and the event because they think he didn't know what he was talking about. Not only that, you send your kid off to college now, and if he thinks they're going to take a Bible class, they're going to hear that these events didn't happen because there's no evidence for it. And I had a crisis of faith, Eric. I mean, when I was doing this, I literally came home and had a crisis of faith in the very beginning. But I was able to work past that, and that's when we started to find patterns of evidence. And those patterns are so powerful, and they're really showing that God has acted in history. And that's why I think it's important for your kids, your teenagers, your family to know about this so that they won't be deceived in some ways from, when people say, oh, there's no evidence for that. Why would you believe that? That's why I think these films are important.
Folks, again, visit patternsofevidence.com for more information on Journey to Mount Sinai Part 2 and all of Timothy Mahoney's fascinating films on biblical history and archaeology. Great stuff.